The champagne flute nearly slipped out of my hand the moment I heard the word husband land on top of my name like it belonged there. A dozen relatives turned toward me at once, all of them holding some version of the same drink, all of them wearing the same stunned, delighted expression. Somewhere behind me, a string quartet kept playing like nothing had happened. Everything had happened. Nora Vance, my roommate of 2 years, the woman who alphabetized the spice rack and refused to admit she cried during dog food commercials, had just told 40 members of her extended family that I was her husband. I hadn't proposed. We hadn't dated. 12 hours earlier, the extent of our romantic history was one argument about whose turn it was to buy paper towels. "Caleb," she said, looping her arm through mine with the easy confidence of a woman who had rehearsed this in a mirror, "tell Aunt Priscilla how we met." Aunt Priscilla leaned forward, eyes bright with the particular hunger of a woman who considered other people's love lives a competitive sport. I opened my mouth. Nothing useful came out. Somewhere in my chest, my heart was staging a full rebellion against my ribs. That's the part where I should tell you who I am. But the truth is, for those first 10 seconds, I wasn't entirely sure myself. I was a man standing in a lake house full of strangers, holding a drink I didn't want, married to a woman I'd been quietly in love with for longer than I'd ever let myself admit. My name is Caleb Marsh. I restore old books for a living, water-damaged Bibles, cracked spines, letters so brittle they turn to confetti if you breathe wrong near them. People bring me things that are falling apart and ask me to make them whole again. I'm good at it. I'm good at repairing what other people have given up on. I was significantly worse, it turned out, at repairing the mess my roommate had just made of both our lives in under a minute. 12 hours before that champagne glass nearly hit the floor, Nora had knocked on my bedroom door at 11 at night wearing pajama pants covered in cartoon foxes and an expression I'd only ever seen on her the week her car got towed. "I need a favor," she said. "A large one. Possibly illegal. Is someone dead? Worse. My grandmother wants to see me settled before the reunion." I should explain something about Nora's family. The Vances hold an annual gathering at a lake house that's been there since somebody's great-great-grandfather won it in a card game. And the entire weekend functions less like a family reunion and more like a courtroom where everyone's love life is put on trial. Nora had spent the last 2 reunions fielding questions about her ex-fiancé, a man named Derek who left her 4 days before their wedding with a text message and a half-eaten sandwich still on the counter. Her grandmother, Vivian, had watched her granddaughter get quietly picked apart by pitying relatives for 2 straight summers. This year, Vivian had a stroke in March. A small one. The kind that leaves you walking slower and talking around certain words. The kind that makes a woman start saying things like "before I go" in casual conversation, which is a sentence that ruins your whole week no matter how many times you hear it. Nora's mother had called that afternoon to say Vivian wanted, more than anything, to see her granddaughter happy before the family gathered. Nora had panicked, said the first thing that came to mind, and the first thing that came to mind was apparently me. I told her I was bringing my husband, Nora admitted, standing in my doorway, refusing to make eye contact with anything above my collarbone. "I don't have a husband, Caleb. I have a roommate who owns exactly one nice shirt. I own 3. You are one of them." Here's the part one didn't say out loud that night. The part I'd been carrying around my apartment for the better part of a year like a book I couldn't finish reading. I had wanted to be more than her roommate since approximately the 3rd month we'd lived together. Back when she'd found me elbow deep in a 19th century hymnal at 2 in the morning and sat on the kitchen floor with me instead of telling me to go to bed. I never said anything. She'd just come out of an engagement that shattered her trust in the entire concept of promises. The last thing she needed was her roommate handing her another one. So when she asked me to pretend, for one weekend, to be the husband she didn't have, I said yes for reasons I told myself were purely practical. Free lake house. A break from my studio. A favor between friends. I lied to myself as badly as she'd apparently lied to her grandmother. We drove up the next morning with a story we'd built in about 4 hours flat. Married 8 months ago at the county courthouse. Small ceremony. Didn't want to fuss. Nora's ring finger suddenly, wearing a costume jewelry band she'd bought at a drugstore on the way out of town. It looked convincing enough in bad gas station lighting. It looked significantly less convincing under Aunt Priscilla's chandelier, but by then it was far too late to take it back. Part 2. The lake house sat at the end of a gravel road. White paint peeling at the corners, the kind of place that had absorbed 60 years of family arguments into its floorboards. Nora's family didn't so much greet us as descend on us, an avalanche of cousins and casseroles, and someone's overexcited golden retriever. "You didn't tell us you eloped?" her mother said, hugging me like she'd known me for a decade instead of 90 seconds. "We wanted it small," I said, which was technically true, since the actual number of people who knew was 0. Vivian found us near the porch swing an hour later. She moved slower than I imagined from the photographs Nora kept on the refrigerator, one hand resting on a cane, the other reaching for her granddaughter's face like she needed to confirm she was real. "Let me look at him," Vivian said, turning to me with eyes so sharp they made the rest of her seem younger than her body suggested. "Nora tells me you fix old books. When they'll let me. Everything wants fixing eventually." She patted the seat beside her. "Sit. Tell me something true." That request lodged itself somewhere under my sternum and stayed there the entire weekend. I sat. I told her about the studio, about the manuscripts that arrived in boxes labeled beyond repair that somehow weren't. I didn't tell her the other true thing, the one currently sitting 3 feet away pretending to check her phone while actually listening to every word. That night, in the guest room we were forced to share for the sake of the lie, Nora and I built a wall of pillows down the center of the bed like teenagers at a sleepover. "This is insane," she whispered into the dark. "My grandmother just made you cry." "I didn't cry. Your voice did the thing." "There's no thing." "There's absolutely a thing." A pause. "Thank you for doing this." "You'd do it for me." "Would I?" Her voice had gone quiet in a different way, the kind of quiet that makes a room feel smaller. "I don't actually know that about myself anymore." Derek made me doubt what I'd do for anyone. I turned toward the wall of pillows, toward the outline of her in the dark. "You climbed onto a kitchen floor at 2 in the morning to keep a man company while he glued a hymnal back together. I think you do plenty." Silence. Then, so soft I almost missed it. "That's the night I started liking you, actually." "I never told you that." The pillow wall suddenly felt less like a boundary and more like an insult to both of us. I didn't say anything back. I should have. Instead, I lay there memorizing the sound of her breathing until I fell asleep, which is a humiliating thing to admit about a grown man with a mortgage. The next 2 days moved fast, the way weekends with too many relatives always do. We held hands during a family photo that Nora's mother insisted on, my palms sweating so badly I apologized twice. We danced badly at the rehearsal dinner for Nora's cousin Bree, who was getting married that Saturday in the same backyard where 3 generations of Van Cess had gotten married before her. We answered the same 4 questions from 17 different aunts. Where's the ring from? When's the real wedding? Are we thinking about kids? And every answer we invented pulled us one thread deeper into a story neither of us had signed up to tell. Somewhere around Friday afternoon, pretending stopped feeling like pretending. It happened during the least romantic possible task, hauling folding chairs out of the boathouse for Bree's ceremony. Nora had sawdust in her hair and a bruise forming on her shin from a chair that fought back. I was covered in cobweb and complaining loudly about it. "Hold still," she said, reaching up to pick something out of my hair. Her fingers stayed a beat longer than the task required. "You've got a whole ecosystem up here. Occupational hazard of marrying into a family with a haunted boathouse." "It's not haunted. There's a raccoon skull on that shelf." "Nora, that's Kevin. He's part of the family." I laughed, and something about the sound of it in that dusty little boathouse made her go quiet, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen aimed at me before. Not the fond exasperation I knew from 2 years of shared grocery lists. Something with more weight behind it. What? I asked. Nothing. She looked away first. You're just good at this. At carrying chairs? At being someone I can lean on without it costing me anything. That sentence should have felt like a compliment. Instead, it landed somewhere between my ribs like a stone dropped in still water, because I understood exactly what she meant and exactly why it scared her. Derek had made leaning on someone feel expensive. I wanted, more than almost anything I'd wanted in years, to prove to her it didn't have to be. I set down the chairs. It doesn't cost you anything with me. It never has. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for one long, dangerous second, neither of us moved toward the door, or the chairs, or anything resembling common sense. Caleb, she started. Someone banged on the boathouse door and hollered that dinner was ready, and the moment folded itself back up like it had never happened at all. Part 3. Saturday, the day of Bree's wedding. Vivian pulled me aside before the ceremony while Nora was busy fixing her cousin's veil. She led me to the edge of the dock, cane tapping against the wood, and lowered herself onto a bench with the careful patience of someone who no longer trusted her own knees. I need you to answer something honestly, she said. Are you actually married to my granddaughter? The lake stretched out flat and silver in front of us. I could have lied. I'd been lying successfully for 3 days. No, I said instead. We're not. Vivian didn't look surprised. She looked, if anything, relieved that I'd finally said it. I had a stroke, Caleb. I didn't lose my mind. There's no marriage license in this family I don't know about within a week. How long have you known? Since the ring didn't fit her properly, and she kept switching hands. She turned to face me fully. Why did you agree to this? I could have made up something safe. Instead, for reasons I still can't fully explain except that Vivian had a way of pulling truth out of a person, I told her everything. The 2 years of quiet feelings I'd never acted on. The fear of ruining the only real thing I had by asking for more than she was ready to give. The favor that had somehow turned into the most honest 3 days of pretending I'd ever lived through. So you love her, Vivian said. Not a question. I love her. And she doesn't know. She's had one person already promise her forever and disappear 4 days before delivering on it. I didn't want to be another disappointment wearing a nicer suit. Vivian reached over and patted my hand with more strength than I expected from someone recovering from a stroke. Let me tell you something about disappointment, young man. It isn't caused by people who love you honestly. It's caused by people who lie about what they want until the lying becomes easier than the truth. She held my gaze. Don't become the second man in her life who couldn't manage the truth. I didn't get the chance to answer, because that was the exact moment Nora's sister Reagan came storming down the dock holding my phone, her expression somewhere between fury and vindication. I need everyone's attention, Reagan announced to the small crowd gathering for the ceremony, loud enough that heads turned across the whole yard. Because apparently my sister's husband doesn't exist in any county record anywhere in this state. The wedding music kept playing somewhere behind us, absurdly cheerful, while my carefully built lie caught fire in front of 40 relatives holding programs. Part 4. Nora appeared at the edge of the dock, still holding Bree's veil, her face draining of color as she registered what Reagan was holding up, screenshots, apparently, of a courthouse record search that had come back empty on every possible spelling of our names. Reagan, Nora said, voice tight, not now. Then when? At the funeral, when she finds out on her deathbed that you lied to her about the one thing she asked for. The word landed hard. Vivian flinched beside me, and I felt something in my chest crack clean down the middle, because Reagan wasn't wrong to be angry. She was protecting a grandmother she loved from being deceived, and I understood that even as I hated watching it happen in front of an entire wedding party. It was my idea, I said, standing. Every eye on the dock swung toward me. Nora didn't lie to hurt anyone. She panicked because she loves this family and didn't want your grandmother worrying about her during what might be one of her last good summers. I said yes because. I stopped. Nora was staring at me, waiting, the veil forgotten in her hands. Because I've wanted to be exactly what I pretended to be for longer than I've been willing to admit, I finished. Pretending to be her husband wasn't hard, Reagan. It was the easiest thing I've done in years. The hard part was doing it and knowing it wasn't real. Silence dropped over the dock like a held breath. Somewhere behind us, the wedding officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, unsure whether to keep setting up chairs during whatever this had become. Nora set the veil down on the bench. You're saying that now? In front of my entire family, during my cousin's wedding? I know the timing is a disaster. The timing is catastrophic. Her voice cracked, but she wasn't backing away. She was stepping closer. You've lived across the hall from me for 2 years, Caleb. 2 years of grocery lists and terrible movie nights, and you're telling me now, standing on a dock, in front of Aunt Priscilla? I'm telling you now because I was a coward before now. That seemed to knock something loose in her. Her shoulders dropped. The anger in her expression softened into something rawer and far more frightening to witness. I told them you were my husband because it was the first lie that came out that didn't feel like a lie, she said quietly. It felt like the truth wearing a disguise. I've been in love with you since the hymnal, Caleb. I just didn't think you'd ever want someone this broken. You're not broken. You're someone who survived something that would have flattened most people, and you still got up and organized folding chairs and defended a raccoon skull like it was family. A wet laugh broke out of her despite everything. Reagan, mercifully, had gone quiet, phone lowered, watching her sister instead of prosecuting her. Vivian's cane tapped once against the dock. For heaven's sake, she said, kiss the man properly this time. Do it like you mean it, because apparently half the family already believes you're married. Nora crossed the last few feet of dock between us. This is either going to fix everything or ruin your cousin's wedding entirely. I've fixed worse things than a wedding. That's not comforting. It's the only kind of comforting I've got. She kissed me anyway, right there on the dock, in front of a bride in a half-fastened veil, and an aunt who would tell this story for the rest of her natural life. It wasn't careful or rehearsed like the version we'd performed for 3 days. It was the real thing finally showing up to a party it had been invited to since the beginning. When we broke apart, Reagan cleared her throat. So are you two together, or is this a second, more convincing lie? Together, Nora said, not looking away from me. Actually together. No paperwork yet. Give it time, Vivian said, smiling for the first time since Reagan's announcement. I'd like to see one legitimate wedding out of this family before I go. Bree's ceremony started 40 minutes late that day, largely because half the guest list was still recovering from the scene on the dock. Nobody seemed to mind. Weddings, I've learned, have room for more than one kind of beginning. Epilogue. We drove home from the lake house 2 days later with the costume ring still sitting in the cup holder between us. A joke neither of us had the heart to throw away. Nora fell asleep somewhere around the state line with her head against the window, and I spent most of the drive doing the thing I do best, which is fixing something broken slowly enough that nobody notices the moment it becomes whole again. We told our actual families the truth eventually, in pieces, over the following months. Some of it was awkward. Most of it was easier than either of us expected, because it turns out the hardest part of loving someone honestly is deciding to start, not the starting itself. Vivian lived another 1.5 years, long enough to see us move out of the roommate apartment and into a smaller place with 1 bedroom instead of 2, long enough to hold Nora's hand at our real courthouse wedding, small and unannounced, exactly the way Nora had originally described the fake one, long enough to tease me, every single visit, about the raccoon skull she insisted on gifting us as a housewarming present. He still sits on our mantle. Nora calls him Kevin. I've stopped arguing about it. Sometimes, late at night, I catch her looking at the drugstore ring we never threw away, sitting in a small dish by our front door next to our real ones. We should get rid of that, she says every few months, and never does. It's part of the family, I tell her, and she laughs the way she laughed in the boathouse, the sound that made me stop pretending I didn't want this exact, ordinary, unglamorous life. I spent 2 years repairing other people's broken things for a living and somehow missed the one sitting across the hall, waiting for someone patient enough to notice it wasn't actually broken at all, just waiting for the right hands. What would you have done if your roommate introduced you as their spouse in front of an entire family? Have you ever had a lie turn into the truest thing in your life? Tell me your story in the comments. And for those who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every week with no ads. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.